The sound of the suspension file hitting the mahogany desk was heavy. Final. It was the sound a judge makes when he slams a gavel, or the sound a coffin lid makes when a latch clicks shut. Thwack! I didn't look at the file. I kept my eyes fixed on the man sitting across from me. Principal Julian Thorne. He was 32 years old, wearing a three-piece charcoal suit that cost more than the Honda Civic I drove into the parking lot. He had a perfectly trimmed beard, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and a Mont Blanc pen resting between his manicured fingers. Next to me, my son, Leo, shifted in his plastic chair. He was holding a chemical ice pack against his left eye. The skin around the socket was already turning a deep, sickly shade of violet. His lip was split. There was a smear of dried blood on his collar. He was 16 years old, and he was shaking, not from fear, from rage. Thorne leaned back in his leather executive chair. It squeaked, a sound of expensive comfort. He clasped his hands together and gave me a look of practiced sympathy. It was the kind of look a politician gives a constituent right before they raise their taxes. "Mr. Vance," Thorne said. His voice was smooth, cultivated. It had the rhythm of a podcast host. "I understand you're upset. Seeing your son injured is distressing. But we have to look at the bigger picture here. We have to look at the culture of safety we are building at Crestwood High." I didn't say anything. I just watched him. In my line of work, you learn that silence makes guilty people talk. It makes them nervous. They feel the need to fill the void. Thorne cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie. "The policy is clear. It's in the handbook you signed at the beginning of the year. Zero tolerance. That means zero. It doesn't matter who started it. It doesn't matter who threw the first punch. It doesn't matter if Leo claims he was defending himself. In this district, Mr. Vance, we do not distinguish between the hitter and the hit. We distinguish between peace and violence. Your son chose violence." He paused, waiting for me to explode. He was waiting for the shout. He was waiting for the bad parent reaction. He wanted me to stand up, knock over the chair, and scream about fairness. That's what he was used to. He was used to emotional parents he could dismiss as irrational. But I didn't scream. I looked at Leo. "Leo," I said softly, "did you hit Chad?" Leo lowered the ice pack. His good I was wet, but his jaw was set like stone. He cornered me in the locker room. "Dad?" He had two of his friends blocking the door. He shoved me into the lockers. He hit me 3 times before I swung back. I just wanted him to stop. "I believe you," I said. I turned back to Thorne. "You saw the video?" Thorne sighed, a theatrical exhale of patience. "I have reviewed the incident report, Mr. Vance. The specifics of the altercation are irrelevant to the disciplinary outcome. The camera footage confirms Leo struck another student. That is an automatic 10-day suspension. Pending a board review, it could lead to expulsion for aggravated assault." "And the other boy?" I asked. My voice was flat. "Chad, the one who cornered him. The one who hit him 3 times first. Is he suspended?" Thorne's smile tightened at the edges. A micro-expression, a flicker of annoyance. "Chad is receiving counseling. We believe in restorative justice for those who struggle with impulse control. But Chad didn't break a nose, Mr. Vance. Leo did. The outcome dictates the punishment." "So," I said, leaning forward just an inch, "let me get this straight. If my son stands there and lets himself be beaten into a coma, he's a model student. But if he stops the person beating him, he's a criminal." "We don't deal in hypotheticals," Thorne said, tapping the file. "We deal in policy. Leo is suspended. Effective immediately. You need to escort him off the premises. If he returns before the hearing, we will call the police for trespassing." He stood up. The meeting was over. He checked his watch, a heavy gold diver's watch that looked too big for his wrist. He was dismissing me. He thought I was just another blue-collar widower in a flannel shirt, a man with no power, no connections, and no way to fight back against the ironclad bureaucracy of the school board. I stood up slowly. I put a hand on Leo's shoulder. I could feel the tension in the boy's frame. He felt let down. He felt like the world was broken. He was right. It was... "Okay," I said. Thorne looked surprised. "Okay. I understand your position," I said. "You're just following the rules. You're a man of the book, Principal Thorne." "Exactly." Thorne beamed, relieved that I was rolling over. "It's about standards, Mr. Vance. We have to have standards. We certainly do, I said. I picked up the suspension notice. I folded it neatly and placed it in my breast pocket. I looked around the office one last time. I memorized the layout. The computer monitor facing away from the door. The password written on a sticky note tucked under the keyboard. I could see the yellow edge peeking out. The framed diploma from an online university on the wall. Come on, Leo, I said. As we walked to the door, Thorne called out one last piece of advice. Use this time to teach him about de-escalation, Mr. Vance. Violence is never the answer. I stopped at the door. I didn't turn around. I just smiled to myself. You're right, Principal Thorne, I whispered, too low for him to hear. Violence is sloppy. I prefer a different approach. I closed the door behind us. The heavy click of the latch sounded different this time. It didn't sound like a coffin closing on us. It sounded like the starting gun of a race, only I knew we were running. To understand why I was letting my neighbor pour concrete on my land, you have to understand what I did for a living for 40 years. I am, or was, a land surveyor. Most people look at a neighborhood and see houses, fences, and grass. They see yards. I don't. When I look at the world, I see a matrix of invisible lines. I see bearings and distances. I see iron pins buried 18 inches underground, rusted and forgotten by everyone except the county clerk and God. I see the grid. In my profession, precision isn't a preference. It's a religion. You don't guess where the line is. You don't eyeball it. You shoot the azimuth. You verify the benchmark. If you're off by an inch, you are wrong. And if you're wrong, people lose their homes. I retired 3 years ago. I wanted quiet. I bought this house specifically because it sat on a double lot, bordering a wooded easement that couldn't be developed. It was my sanctuary. Then Greg bought the house next door. Greg was a flipper. He was 35, drove a leased Mercedes G-Wagon that he parked on the sidewalk, and described himself on Instagram as a real estate mogul. He didn't buy homes to live in them. He bought them, slapped a coat of gray paint on everything, installed cheap subway tile, and sold them for double the price to young couples from the city who didn't know any better. He bought the charming 1950s ranch next to me in March. By April, he had cut down 200-year-old oak trees because they blocked the light. By May, the noise began. Dumpsters being dropped at 6 a.m. Crews blasting bad music. Dust covered my porch. I tolerated it. People have a right to improve their property. I kept to myself. I worked in my garden. I pruned my hydrangeas, a specific variety I had been cultivating for a decade. The war started on a Tuesday in June. I was in my garage, organizing my tackle box, when I heard the sound of screeching metal. It was the sound of a crowbar ripping wood apart. I walked out to the side yard. 2 guys in T-shirts were tearing down the cedar privacy fence that separated my lot from Greg's. They were ripping the posts out of the ground, tossing the wood into a heap. Greg was standing there, supervising. He was wearing noise-canceling headphones around his neck. "Morning," I said. My voice was calm. I don't yell. Yelling is for people who don't have facts. Greg turned. He flashed a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Hey, Pops. Sorry about the noise. Just clearing the canvas." "That fence," I said, pointing to the pile of splintered cedar. "That's my fence." Greg laughed. A dismissive, short bark of a laugh. "Now, bro, it was ugly. Rotting. I'm doing you a favor. We're putting up a sleek, horizontal slat wall. Modern vibes. It's gonna look sick." "I didn't ask if it was ugly," I said. "I said it was mine, and it marks the property line." "Actually," Greg said, stepping closer, invading my personal space just enough to be aggressive. "My contractor ran the numbers. That fence was 5 feet inside my property. You've been squatting on my land, Frank. But don't worry, I'm not going to sue you for back taxes. I'm just taking back what's mine." I looked at him. I looked at the hole where the fence post used to be. I knew exactly where the property pin was. I had located it myself when I bought the house. It was buried under a layer of mulch, exactly 6 inches outside the line of the fence. The fence had been on my property. Greg was wrong. But he wasn't just wrong. He was confidently wrong. "Greg," I said, trying one last time, "you need to be careful. The property line isn't where you think it is. The plat maps for this subdivision are tricky. There's a slight skew in the northern boundary. Greg rolled his eyes. He pulled out his iPhone. He opened an app, one of those free property finder apps that uses standard GPS. Look, Pops, he said, shoving the screen in my face. Blue to red line. I'm well within my rights. Technology, man. It doesn't lie. GPS consumer-grade GPS. It has a margin of error of up to 15 feet. Using a phone app to determine a property line is like using a sledgehammer to perform my surgery. That app isn't a survey, I said. It's close enough, Greg snapped. Look, I'm building a pool here. An infinity pool. It's happening. You can either get on board and enjoy the view of the new fence, or you can go inside and watch the History Channel. But get out of my way. He turned his back on me. Vinny, keep digging. We need that area cleared for the plumbing trench. I watched Vinny stick a shovel into the ground. He dug up my hydrangeas. He tossed the root ball onto the pile of trash. My hydrangeas. 10 years of work. Gone in a second. I felt a tightening in my chest. It was the urge to grab the shovel, to scream, to fight. But 40 years of surveying had taught me discipline. When you find an error, you don't scream at the ground. You document it. You measure it. You build a case that is so mathematically undeniable that no amount of arguing can change it. Okay, Greg, I said to his back. Okay. He didn't turn around. You do what you have to do, I said. I walked back to my garage. I closed the door. My hands were shaking, just a little. Not from fear, from adrenaline. I walked past my fishing gear. I walked to the locked cabinet in the back corner. I pulled a key from my pocket and opened it. Inside, sitting in its hard yellow case, was my Leica total station. It was a $15,000 piece of equipment. It could measure distances to the millimeter from a mile away. It didn't rely on cell towers. It relied on lasers and optics. I patted the case. Close enough, I whispered, repeating Greg's words. I waited until midnight. I waited until the lights in Greg's house went out. I waited until the neighborhood was dead silent. Then I put on my dark jacket. I picked up the yellow case and my tripod. I walked out into the darkness. It was time to see exactly where the line was. Working in the dark is different. Your other senses take over. You hear the wind in the leaves. You smell the damp earth where the excavators had ripped up the yard. I set up the tripod over the first control point. It was an iron rod, half an inch in diameter, buried 18 inches deep near the street. I had located it years ago and capped it with a plastic washer. To anyone else, it was just a piece of rusty metal. To me, it was the anchor of my reality. I leveled the total station. The bubble in the liquid vial centered perfectly. I looked through the optical plummet. Dead center. I turned the scope toward the backyard. I couldn't see the property pin in the rear corner. Greg's pile of construction debris was blocking the line of sight. But I didn't need to see it. I knew the geometry. I knew the bearing. I shot the laser. The red dot danced across the raw earth of the excavation site. I checked the digital readout. I moved the scope. I checked again. My heart rate slowed down. The math doesn't have feelings. The math doesn't care about your ego or your modern vibes. The math just is. And the math was telling me that Greg's pool wasn't just flirting with the property line. It was marrying it. The coping of the pool, the edge where you rest your arms, was going to sit exactly 3 feet and 4 inches onto my deeded land. But it got better. Because of the slope of the yard, the filtration equipment, the pump, the heater, the salt cell system was being installed on a concrete pad that was entirely on my property. Not partially, entirely. I stood there in the dark, the cool night air hitting my face. I looked at the giant hole in the ground. I had a choice. I could go over there tomorrow morning with my findings. I could show him the readout. I could threaten to call the police. If I did that, he would stop. He would be angry. He would curse. But he would just shift the pool 5 feet to the left. He would lose maybe $2,000 in re-excavation costs. He would still get his pool. He would still be the loud, arrogant neighbor who destroyed my hydrangeas. He would still win. I remember the sound of the shovel hitting the roots of my plants. I remember the smug look on his face when he showed me that phone app. Technology, man. It doesn't lie. I packed up the total station. I folded the tripod legs. I wiped the dew off the lens. I wasn't going to tell him. Not yet. I was going to let him invest. In the military, they teach you about commitment bias. It's the idea that the more resources someone pours into a mistake, the harder it is for them to walk away from it. They double down. They refuse to see the truth because the cost of admitting they were wrong is too high. Greg was about to commit about $80,000 to this mistake. I went back inside. I slept like a baby. The next morning, I called Bob Sterling. We had the conversation about the concrete. We set the plan. We need a paper trail, Bob said. We need to prove that you didn't just sit on your hands. We need to prove you were intimidated into silence. Intimidated? I asked. He destroyed your property, Frank. He dug up your garden. He was aggressive. You're an older man living alone. You felt unsafe confronting him again. Bob paused. That's the narrative. It explains why you waited until the construction was finished to file the injunction. You were afraid of retaliation. I'm not afraid of him, I said. The court doesn't need to know that, Bob said. Just stay inside. Let him build. The next 6 weeks were an exercise in torture. It's one thing to decide to wait. It's another thing to live through the noise of your own invasion every single day. Greg hired a crew that worked fast and loud. They were there at 7 a.m., banging tailgates and shouting over the roar of compressors. I sat at my kitchen table, drinking coffee, watching my bank account grow, metaphorically speaking. Every truck that arrived was another deposit into the Justice Fund. First came the steel rebar. Thousands of dollars of steel, woven into a complex basket shape. Cha-ching. Then came the plumbing. Intricate PVC piping, skimmers, main drains. Cha-ching. Then the gunite. That was the day I called Bob. The day the shell became permanent. But the real spending started after the concrete cured. Greg wasn't building a normal pool. He was building a resort. He imported glass tiles from Italy. I watched the delivery guy hand him the invoice. I saw Greg wince, then pull out his credit card. Those tiles were $6 a piece, and he was covering the entire water line with them. He installed a waterfall feature, a sheer descent that poured water from stone wall. The stone was limestone, trucked in from Indiana. He bought a heater that was the size of a Volkswagen. He bought a variable speed pump that cost more than my first car. And through it all, Greg was insufferable. Whenever he saw me in the yard, which was rare because I was playing the part of the intimidated hermit, he would shout over the fence, "Hey, Frank, you see that tile? That's imported. You're going to have the best view in the neighborhood." "It looks expensive," I would say, keeping my head down. "You got to spend money to make money." Greg would yell back, laughing, "This baby is adding 50 grand to the appraisal instantly." He was so confident. He was so sure that he was improving the world by covering it in cement. One afternoon, about a week before completion, I saw him standing on the pool deck with a woman. She was a real estate agent. I recognized her from the billboards in town. They were looking at the pool, pointing at the yard. With this finished, I heard the agent say, "We can list at 850. Maybe 900 if we get a bidding war. The outdoor living space is the selling point." "Exactly," Greg said. "I want to list June 1st, get the summer crowd." He was flipping it. He wasn't even planning to swim in it. He was building it to sell it to someone else, to take the profit and run, leaving me with a noisy, encroaching pool next door forever. That sealed it. If I had any lingering guilt, any tiny voice in my head saying maybe this is too harsh, it died right there. He was treating my property like a line item on his spreadsheet. The final week of May arrived. The trucks stopped coming. The dust settled. Then the water trucks arrived. It takes a long time to fill a 20,000-gallon pool with a garden hose, so Greg hired tankers. Big, shiny tankers that pumped crystal-clear water into the basin. I watched the water level rise. It covered the main drain. It covered the expensive Italian tile. It reached the skimmer line. The pumps turned on. Hum. A quiet, expensive hum. The waterfall started to flow. A perfect sheet of water. It was finished. Greg threw a party that Friday night to celebrate. Just a small one. Him, Vinny the contractor, and a few friends. They were drinking beer, dangling their feet in the water. To the flip, Greg toasted, raising a bottle. To the flip, his friends echoed. I stood in my dark kitchen, watching them. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Monday was Memorial Day. Greg had a massive open house/pool party scheduled. He had invited the entire neighborhood. He had invited potential buyers. He wanted to show off his masterpiece. I picked up the manila envelope that Bob had couriered over that afternoon. It was thick, heavy. Inside was a certified survey stamped by a licensed surveyor, a cease and desist order, and a civil complaint filed with the county court for trespass, encroachment, and destruction of private property. The cover letter demanded the immediate removal of all encroaching structures and restoration of the land to its original grade. I ran my thumb over the edge of the envelope. "Enjoy the swim, Greg," I whispered. "It's going to be the most expensive dip of your life." I went to bed early. I needed to be well rested. I had a party to crash. Memorial Day arrived with a cloudless blue sky, the kind of weather real estate agents pray for. By noon, the street was lined with cars. Greg had gone all out. There was a DJ setting up in the corner of the patio. There were caterers carrying trays of shrimp cocktail. A massive for sale sign was planted in the front yard, with a coming soon rider attached to the top. I watched from my living room. I saw couples walking up the driveway, prospective buyers. I saw the neighbors, people I had known for 20 years, drinking Greg's beer and admiring the glistening blue water of the pool. Greg was in his element. He was wearing linen pants and a button-down shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest. He was holding court by the waterfall, gesturing expansively, probably telling them how he transformed the property. I put on my jacket. I picked up the manila envelope. I checked my pocket for my reading glasses. It was time. I walked out my back door. I didn't sneak. I didn't rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who owns the ground he steps on. I crossed the property line, the real property line, and stepped onto the fresh sod Greg had laid down. The music was loud, some techno beat that thumped in your chest. Nobody noticed me at first. I was just the old guy from next door. Then, Vinny the contractor saw me. He was standing by the cooler. He nudged Greg. "Greg, turn around." When he saw me, his smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then plastered itself back on. He thought I was coming to complain about the noise. He thought he could charm me or dismiss me in front of his guests. "Frank," he shouted, throwing his arms wide. "Glad you could make it. Come grab a burger. We're celebrating the listing." The music dipped as the song changed. The chatter nearby died down. People were watching. They sensed the tension. I walked right up to the edge of the pool deck. I stopped exactly where the concrete met the grass. "I'm not here for a burger, Greg," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Oh, come on." Greg laughed, looking around at his audience. "Don't tell me the music is too loud. It's a holiday, Pops. Live a little." "The music is fine," I said. "The pool is the problem." Greg rolled his eyes. "We went over this. The fence is gone. The pool is built. It's done. You need to let it go." "I can't let it go," I said, sliding my glasses onto my nose. "Because you built it on my land." Greg let out a loud, exaggerated sigh. "Jesus, Frank. We used GPS. Vinny measured it. You're senile. Go home." I opened the envelope. I pulled out the survey map. It was large, printed on heavy bond paper. I unfolded it. It made a crisp, snapping sound. "This is a certified boundary survey," I said, holding it up so the guests could see the red ink lines. "Stamped and sealed by a licensed state surveyor. And this," I pulled out the court order, "is a civil complaint for trespassing." Greg's face changed. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. He walked over and snatched the paper from my hand. He stared at it. "What is this?" he whispered. "That shows the iron pins," I said, pointing to the diagram. "I located them with a Leica total station. You are 3 feet 4 inches over the line. The pool wall, the coping, and the entire filtration pad are on my deeded property." "No," Greg stammered. "No, the app said." "The app was wrong." I cut him off. "And so was Vinny." I looked at Vinny. The contractor turned pale. He started backing away toward the gate. He knew what a certified stamp meant. It meant he was liable. I turned back to Greg. The guests were silent now. The DJ had actually paused the music. The silence was heavy, suffocating. "You ignored my warning," I said. "You dug up my land. You destroyed my property. And now, you have a permanent structure trespassing on my lot. We can work this out," Greg said, his voice pitching up. He looked at the potential buyers who were now backing away, whispering to each other. I can buy the strip of land. I'll pay you double the market value. 5 grand? 10 grand. It's not for sale, I said coldly. 20 grand. Greg shouted. I'll write a check right now. I don't want any money, Greg, I said. I want my yard back. I pointed to the legal document in his hand. That is a demand for removal. You have 30 days to restore the land to its original condition. That means the concrete comes out. The plumbing comes out. The filled dirt goes back in. Greg looked at the shimmering blue water. He looked at the limestone waterfall. He looked at the $80,000 he had just sunk into the ground. You can't make me tear it out, he said, tears actually forming in his eyes. It's finished. You should have listened, I said. I tried to tell you before you poured the concrete. But you told me to go watch the History Channel. I took off my glasses and put them back in my pocket. Well, Greg, I said, turning to walk away. Now your history. The sound of an $80,000 mistake being corrected is even louder than the sound of it being made. It sounds like a jackhammer. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat. It started 3 weeks after the party. Greg tried to fight it, of course. He hired a lawyer, a strip mall guy who handled DUIs. My attorney, Bob Sterling, ate him alive in the preliminary hearing. The judge took one look at my certified survey and the photos of Greg's GPS app, defense, and almost laughed. The ruling was swift. Summary judgment in favor of the plaintiff. The encroachment was willful and negligent. The judge gave Greg strict orders. The structure had to be removed and the soil remediated within 45 days, or the county would do it and lien the property for triple the cost. So, the jackhammers arrived. I sat at my kitchen window, drinking my coffee. It was a beautiful morning. I watched a different crew, because Vinny had skipped town, smash the Italian tiles. I watched them slice through the rebar. I watched the expensive limestone waterfall crumble into rubble. Greg wasn't there to watch. He couldn't stomach it. He had already moved out. The for sale sign was gone. The house was pulled from the market. You can't sell a house that has an active demolition order and a boundary dispute attached to the deed. The flip was a total loss. Between the cost of the pool, the legal fees, and the cost of removal, Greg was underwater. Ironic, considering there was no longer any water in the backyard. It took them 2 weeks to break it all up. Hauling the concrete away required 10 dump trucks. When they were done, my yard was a mess of dirt and tire tracks. But it was my dirt. I hired a landscaper to come in. I replanted the grass. And then I went to the nursery. I found the most expensive, mature hydrangeas I could find. Blue ones, the kind that need specific soil acidity. I planted them exactly where the pool pump used to be. I watered them. I stood back and admired the view. A few months later, the house next door went up for foreclosure auction. Greg had defaulted on the hard money loan he used to buy it. A nice young couple bought it. They were quiet. They asked me where the property line was before they put up a swing set. I went out there with them. I showed them the iron pin. I showed them the line. Thank you, the young husband said. We want to make sure we don't encroach. That's smart, I said, shaking his hand. Good fences make good neighbors. I walked back to my porch. I sat down and listened to the wind in the trees. No techno music, no construction trucks, just the sound of order, the sound of boundaries being respected. There is a seduction in speed. In the modern world, everyone wants to move fast. They want to disrupt. They want to break things. They think that rules are just obstacles for people who lack vision. Greg thought he could move fast. He thought a phone app and a pile of cash made him a king. He thought that because I was old and quiet, I was irrelevant. He forgot the most basic rule of construction, and perhaps of life. You cannot build a castle on land you do not own. He mistook my silence for weakness. He didn't realize that I wasn't hiding. I was waiting. I was letting the concrete cure. I was letting the commitment bias set in. If I had stopped him on day one, he would have learned nothing. He would have just been annoyed. By waiting, I ensured he would never forget. Sometimes, the most aggressive thing you can do is nothing at all. You just stand on your line, watch the enemy overextend himself, and wait for the perfect moment to hand him the bill. Measure twice, cut once, and never, ever argue with a surveyor about where the line is. This is Dante. Keep your boundaries clear.